Hi, my name's Ollie. I'm a history and politics student at the University of Cambridge, and in this video I'm going to talk you through how to answer source or extract questions in A-level politics. This kind of approach is what helped me get an A star in A-level politics and has helped many of the students I tutor in A-level politics massively improve their grades in these specific type of questions. This advice applies for the source questions in the Edexcel Politics A-level and the extract questions in the AQA Politics A-level. And it's structured into two key sections, this video. First of all, I'm going to show you how you can go through a source when you sit in the exam and plan out an answer to the question. And then in the second half of the video, I'm going to go through the differences between how to answer source questions and how to answer essay questions, because they're not too different. It's just a couple of things you need to change when answering the source questions. So make sure to check out my previous video on how to answer essay questions first, so you know more of a general structure on how to answer essays, so the differences from that to this will make a bit more sense. The PDF I'm using in this video, which you should see up there, can be found if you follow the first link in the description, where you'll also be able to find other kind of A-level politics content, such as example A-star source questions, kind of full written answers, which you can look through if you're interested, and a place to sign up for tutoring if that's something you'd be interested in. Make sure to stick around till the end if you want to hear a bit more about that, but without further ado, let's get into it. So first of all, how to plan source questions. So what I recommend is first going through the source with two highlighters and picking out points on either side. You want to get as many points on either side of the question or of the argument as possible, so that then you can decide how you're going to structure and formulate an answer to the question. And then you're going to want to try and sort those into different groups, so into two sides of the argument, and then you can get paragraphs from them. The sources kind of normally lend themselves to this. They're written or chosen with the kind of idea of you can write an essay on them, so there will be both sides of the argument. The one I'm showing you in this, I'm going to use an example in this video, kind of lends itself very well to this, because it's kind of got one person having one side of the argument and then another person having the other side of the argument, though it's not completely clear cut like that. Some of them will be a bit more difficult. They won't just be one side of the argument and the second side of the argument, it will all be in one source, but the same kind of advice completely applies. So the source we're going to use, or I'm going to use as an example in this question, is from the Edexcel A-level paper from June 2019. And it's for the question, using the source, evaluate the view that proportional representation would improve elections to the House of Commons. So if you want to pause the video and look through that source quickly in the PDF up there, or you can go and find the PDF if you want to see it a bit more clearly, and maybe like plan out the answer to yourself. So yeah, once you pause the video, we're back. And so points on either side of the argument for whether proportional representation would improve election to the House of Commons. So kind of a key point with the source questions is that all of your arguments have to start from the source. So they don't necessarily have to be quotes, but it's very useful to use quotes. But just there's no point saying, or the examiner doesn't like it, if you have kind of three arguments from the source and then just add one of your own in relation to the question. That's not what you're supposed to do. It has to all start from the source. And of course you can kind of build your own knowledge into that. You definitely want to be building your own knowledge into it, but it really has to be based on the arguments from the source. So for points on either side, so firstly for points against the idea that proportional representation would improve election to the House of Commons, this is mainly from the Steve Double part of the source. First of all, proportional representation would put too much power in the hands of parties, including extremist parties, and remove the power of MPs to represent their constituencies. So that's kind of grouped together a few different points he made, which I've kind of shown the different ones in the quotes. So he says proportional representation will damage democracy by putting more power in the hands of parties, as explicitly saying the role of parties. He said the first past the post, which is obviously the opposite of changes to proportional representation, has a key role in preventing extremist parties from gaining seats. And finally, there is a direct link between the MP and their constituency, which I think you can link quite well into the fact that parties, or his argument is that in first past the post, parties don't have too much power, and that direct link between the MP and the constituency, which is often seen as kind of a key benefit of first past the post, would be removed if proportional representation came in. And then this kind of second group of points, that would kind of be one paragraph I'd use. And the second group of points to use is that compared to first past the post, proportional representation will be complicated and fail to deliver strong governments. You can see this in the quotes here. First past the post invariably delivers strong and stable government, and it's clear and easy to understand, which are, I'm sure, as you've studied, kind of key points for keeping first past the post instead of proportional representation, especially if you look over at Europe. I think Belgium kind of had a no government 650 days because of, or something similar. That might be a bit of an exaggeration, because of proportional representation. So that kind of clear, simple to understand is a key argument for first past the post. So there we've kind of looked through the source and picked out as many quotes as possible in support of Double's argument, so against proportional representation, improving election to the House of Commons, and then sort of group them into kind of two paragraphs in order to get a paragraph structure and answer to the question. So there is obviously a bit of grouping where it's like the first one, it's it'll put too much power in the hands of parties, which I think works in well with the last point of the direct link between the MP and their constituency. The extremist parties, preventing extremist parties from gaining seats is a bit different to that, but it still has to do with the role of parties in politics, so I think you can still put it together. And then for the second side of the argument, which of course mainly Caroline Lucas's part of the argument, firstly it's that proportional representation would provide a better, more conciliatory type of politics. So it's really improving the type of politics. She says that it would, that first past the post promotes adversarial politics and encourages each of the major parties to defeat their opposition completely, which negates the need for post-election cooperation. Then the other source actually has a counterpoint to that, which you can use obviously in your paragraphs. You're going to want to be using counterpoints sometimes, especially if they really flow in well. So because Double explicitly addresses it, I say from the other source, obviously the different part of the source, because he explicitly addresses it, saying the first past the post system enables us to exchange our strongly, passionately held views in the House of Commons. So that's kind of promoting the style of politics of first past the post in a more positive light. So it works quite well in kind of planning a counterpoint. And then the second paragraph, or kind of grouping of points, which I've got for Lucas's side of the argument, is that it would result in a more representative parliament and government and improve the quality of democracy in the UK. So quite a few quotes for this. That first past post is damaging the legitimacy of our system of government through its winner-takes-all approach, and that PR would encourage more to vote, therefore improve participation in politics. And finally, would improve the chance of electing a parliament that better reflects modern Britain. So what I've done there in terms of planning is go through the source, as I said earlier, kind of do it with two highlighters. Is really useful if you're in an exam or a pen, whatever works for you, and then find key quotes and points from either side of the source, and then seek to group them for either side of the argument, so that you can get kind of 2 points on one side and 2 points the other in order to answer the question. Then something you want to do before you're going to start writing, of course, once you've got your paragraphs planned out, or even before you've got your paragraphs planned out, if you want to plan an overall argument to the question, is really get that overall argument to the question. So the overall argument I've gone for, yours just by no means has to be the same as this, but is that whilst Lucas overstates the argument that proportional representation would provide a better style of politics, as it would lead to a more unstable form of coalition politics with weaker governments, proportional representation should arguably still be introduced in spite of this, as Parliament being representative is deeply important in a democracy and would encourage greater participation. So I am siding with Lucas's side of the source, and I am providing an answer to the question, but it's a more nuanced version, saying I agree with half of Caroline Lucas's argument to the question, and kind of agree with half of Steve Double's, but the representative element of Caroline Lucas's argument to the question is so important that it overrides it, and therefore there should be proportional representation in UK politics. You don't have to agree with that. That's just a kind of answer to the question I had. But if you look back at the, or if you look at the other another video I've done on how to write essay questions, providing a bit of nuance can be a really important way to improve your essays. So kind of rather than just saying yes or no as an answer to the question, kind of really weighing it up a bit and thinking about it a bit more can be a really good way to hit those top grades, which I've kind of sought to demonstrate here. So now that we've kind of gone through and talked about kind of how to plan a source question, now I think it's quite useful to talk about the differences with normal essay questions. So there's going to be differences in the introduction, differences in the main paragraph, and differences in the conclusion. So ultimately, as you'll see in the kind of the examples I give, which are still in relation to the question we planned, there's not too many differences from how you write normal essay questions. it's just kind of really constantly referring to the source and making sure you're quoting and making sure your arguments are based on the source. So as I say here, kind of source questions should be very similar to normal essay questions in a lot of ways, especially in terms of the argument, how the argument is structured and set out. As I said, they can use the kind of 2 for, 2 against, or the debates within each paragraph structure, which if you look at that previous essay I talked about, you can see in a bit more detail. What's a bit different is the sources should be used as the basis of all of the points, as I said. So starting off with the introduction, the structure of the introduction will be very similar to the introduction formula that I talked about in the other video. You really got to make sure you watch this first to make sense of this video. But a sentence setting the scene, then setting out the different sides of the debate, which will kind of flow naturally from your plan if you planned out the different paragraphs. And finally, a sentence setting out your argument and answer to the question. And as I say here, all that's different is that the setting out of the different sides of the argument and the setting out of your argument itself should be done kind of in the language of the source and using quotes if possible. So I've got an example introduction here. So actually you can pause and read through it, but I'll just kind of point to some important points in it. So first of all, in terms of this second part, so where we're setting out the different arguments in the source, the key point is that it's done in relation to the source. So some figures in UK politics, such as Green Party MP Caroline Lucas, argue, so it's really referencing the source, then citing her arguments, including a quote in there. You don't always have to include quotes, but if it kind of works naturally, it can be really useful, especially in the introduction. In the main paragraph, you definitely need to be quoting, not necessarily in the introduction. And I've cited Steve Double on the other side, obviously referencing the source as well. So this one kind of lends itself quite easily to having one side of the argument, another side of the argument, and referencing the source. And then the overall argument, I will actually just use what I wrote earlier. So similar to essay questions, it is answering the question and using the terms of the question, but it's also referring back to the source. So it's referring to which side of the source you argue. This source lends itself more to kind of siding with one side of the argument because there are two people specifically setting out different sides of the argument. Sometimes it won't be you side with one side of the argument, you say these points are more persuasive, or overall. You don't necessarily, in the argument, you won't necessarily have to refer back to the source, but if you can, if it lends itself naturally to, then do so. See, I'll just scroll up there if you want to pause and look through that again quickly. So now onto the conclusion. I think it's a bit useful to go into the conclusion first rather than the main paragraph, just because it's quite similar to how the introduction does it. So it should be very similar to that of a normal essay, seeking to bring together and synthesize the argument made throughout the essay, whilst clearly restating to the examiner that you're answering the question by using the terms of the question. And once again, with the introduction, is the only difference is that it should be done with reference to the source and in the language of the source. So if you pause and look through it, you see, once again, still quoting the source a bit in terms of the key arguments, referencing Double, referencing Caroline Lucas, just kind of having a conclusion that is similar to if the question was an essay question, but just kind of stating the arguments in terms of the source, and of course only using arguments that are stated in the source, as that's what we would have developed in the main paragraphs. So yeah, you can pause that and look through it if you'd like, and of course ask any questions in the comments below if you've got any questions about that. And then finally, the last part of this video is kind of, I think, the most important point, and where the source questions differ the most, or where it's important to show a difference the most, is in the main paragraphs. So you're going to want to start with a reference to the source, so kind of as the source states, or really quoting straight away. So it'll be similar to the structure of normal paragraphs, as I set out in that other video. So you have the introductory sentence, and you have the development of the argument. But all I'm saying is that it's done in the language of the source. So you see here we're quoting in the introduction sentence, and then Lucas notes how safe seats, once again quoting and referencing one of her key arguments. And then so you do definitely introduce points from the source, like these green points here are all points from the source, but the best A-star essays will kind of build upon it or explore it in relation to your own knowledge. So here I've brought in a different fact, kind of looking at the safe seat of Maidenhead and as an example, and a fact from the Electoral Reform Society to really build on Lucas's argument and show that I agree with it. And then kind of here Lucas is likely referring to the core vote of the two main parties and how it's declined, showing that I'm aware of the argument that Lucas is making. So really building on her argument in the kind of idea of representation, the importance of Parliament being more representative, and how proportional representation would be able to achieve that. So once again, pause that if you want to look through it and ask any questions in the comments. And then finally, just got another example for the main paragraphs. Here, I've actually not used too much from the source. Of course, very much starting the source. You're going to want to start every paragraph with the source. Here, it's a bit more focused on the development with my own knowledge. This will vary based on the paragraphs. You're going to want them to be, normally they will be a bit more of the source than this one. But yeah, once again, you can pause that and look through kind of an example paragraph if you'd like. As I said in the intro, I do have kind of full example essays that I am selling. If you click in the link in the description, if you want kind of to look through a full essay, which will be annotated similarly to this to show how you can improve your source question answers. So yeah, that's pretty much it. As I said, it's not too different from normal essay questions, just kind of the way you plan it and making sure you're referring to the source and using the arguments from the source is the key point. And I've sought to kind of give you some examples there to illustrate that quite well. So just before you go, I've got a couple of things that you might benefit from in terms of further A-level politics content. So first of all, you can see the PDF that's been up there, and I've been looking up down here by clicking on the first link in the description if you want to find it. Also make sure to subscribe, and I'll be releasing new A-level politics content. And then, as I said, if you think you'd benefit from more examples and a bit more in-depth teaching, I do offer tutoring. So if you follow the same link in the description, you can sign up for tutoring with me if you'd like, as well as other content like those full exemplar essays and source questions I was talking about, and banks of essay plans that I'm planning on releasing in the coming weeks. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Drop any feedback in the comments below and any questions, and I'll see you next time.